Well, at least from the scope of offensive system, Doug Pederson's been a backup for Dan Marino, Brett Favre, and in a lot of that time been a starter for the Philadelphia Eagles, worked for Andy. I'm sure you know the history of Doug Pederson. But I think from the scope offensively, the structure, it'll look the same. But you're talking about leading a football team, leading an organization. So that part remains to be uncertain. But I think you'll see a lot of Andy Reid similarities offensive, definitely.
Well, as a leader, obviously the backup quarterback a lot of times doesn't get a lot of pub. Either he's the most popular guy on a team that doesn't have a great quarterback, or he's very unknown. You mentioned Marino and Favre, but just sitting in rooms with him, getting ready for games, what kind of football mind was Doug Pederson?
Oh, Doug's a football mind. I mean, a lot of times when he was the backup for Favre, it was Doug Pederson who would, talk to the receivers, talk to the tight ends. It would explain exactly what's going on, what he sees. You're the first heir to the head coach when you're the backup quarterback to a guy like Brett Favre. So they had a very close relationship. And the good thing about Doug Pederson is he remained pretty much in the same system for about 20 years. So he has a lot of knowledge offensively, that is, about the West Coast offense and about Andy Reid's offensive scope as well.
Let me ask you, because you obviously played for Andy in your one season in Philly, but he was in Green Bay before that. Mike Holmgren, they run this West Coast. He's doing it still in Kansas City. Do you think that offense, obviously they're in the playoff, they've won 11 straight games, but when Andy was here, it seemed like people were kind of getting tired of the offense. It seemed like it was getting predictable. But is Andy Reid and then probably Doug Pederson's offense, does it still have a role in the NFL? Does it still have a place in today's game?
Yeah, without a doubt. When you look at the quick game, the three-step drop, a lot of that is taken out of the West Coast offense. A lot of the formation switches and personnel changes, things that you saw Andy Reid do, things that Andy Reid saw Mike Holmgren do, things that Mike Holmgren saw George Seifert do. So it's a deep, Bill Walsh. There's a deep trail for this West Coast offense. And Doug Pederson, like I said, a guy that's been in that system for 20 years. He knows the X's and O's. He knows the ins and outs offensively. So I can speak for Doug from an offensive mind standpoint. He is a phenomenal mindset in the NFL West Coast offense. I don't know what his leadership role and how that will pan out for him here on as a Philadelphia Eagles head coach.
Antonio Freeman's with us, ESPN Wisconsin, and shout out to the people listening online in Madison, Wisconsin. He's, of course, the Super Bowl champion, and at A Freeman 86 for to keeping track of what Antonio Freeman's doing these days. And you just mentioned when Doug Pederson, a lot of times the backup quarterback or the backup catcher, the backup point guard, they become the head coach in the NBA, the manager in baseball, the coach in football. Did Doug Pederson seem like that guy when he was in Green Bay that one day was going to be a head football coach? Did he have that kind of personality?
I knew he would go into coaching somehow. I didn't know he'd be an NFL head coach. I figured, he'd try out his skill at the college level and somehow work his way in. But, yes, just from a backup quarterback standpoint, you're the guy pretty much who never gets a chance to play if you get to watch everything great about the starting quarterback. And you also get to analyze everything not so great or everything wrong about this quarterback. So you're able to incorporate all of those skill sets into being a coach. Now, being a leader of a team, I never saw Doug as the leader of an NFL football team, but he's being chosen for this position for a reason. I think, again, knowledge. I think the knowledge offensively is what is going to be key and what is going to be analyzed the most for Doug Pederson.
Antonio, in your time in the NFL, how important? Because Andy, when he got hired, I think a similar situation. I mean, he was a quarterback coach, never a coordinator, never called plays, but he had a strong staff around him. When you are a part of a great football team, which you were, how important are those coordinators? Many times the head coach gets the recognition, but how much of a role do coordinators play on great teams?
I mean, coordinators, they're a real key component. I mean, when you think about the head coach, you're talking at the top of the food chain. So when you're talking about meetings, you're talking about the offensive coordinator. When you're talking about meetings about game plans, you're talking about meeting with the offensive coordinator. You're talking about Andy Reid being a quarterback coach. Well, there's a chain. The chain of command is head coach, offensive coordinator, and somewhere in that mix, there's the quarterback coach who's knee-deep and right in the center of the nucleus of everything that goes on there. So the coaching staff and the chain of command is very important because you need that offensive coordinator to be able to relate and communicate with those players a lot more effectively than that head coach, because he'll have more opportunities to have those, if I may, intimate times with those players in meetings on the field, and he's going to be your contact person more or less at the offensive coordinator. So those offensive coordinators and even those GA, those grad assistants, those guys that come on to become head coaches and play roles in big offensive situations around the league as well. So it's all important relatively.
Yeah, and you see so many of Andy Reid's guys. When Andy was in Green Bay, he was an unknown guy, and I guess you kind of look around and say, he's had a pretty good career as a head coach. Did Andy seem like he was going to be a head coach when he was in Green Bay as a very unknown quarterback coach?
I mean, X's and O's wise, yes, I could see it. He was very smart. He was very aware of what was going on. He knew the infrastructure, the ins and outs of the offensive system. And you just talked about it. A head coach is about who else can I put in this food chain to help run this organization, because those guys are going to be so important because they're going to be dealing with the players on a day-to-day basis. So those people that I appoint in those positions, whether it be offensive coordinator, quarterback coach, running back coach, offensive line coach, those have to be important hires because it's a monopoly of guys that make the head coach look great. You see so many hires from offensive quarterbacks, from offensive coordinators, from quarterback coaches, because those guys deal with those superstar caliber type players on a daily basis. So their roles become just as important, if not more important, than that head coach's role because they deal so much directly with the players.
Antonio Freeman's with us. 2002, he played with the Philadelphia Eagles, Andy Reid. Brad Childress was the offensive coordinator. His name has been mentioned as a potential coordinator here if he doesn't stay in Kansas City and get the job there. Also, Sean McDermott was on that staff. Pat Shurmur was on that staff. When you look at Pat, McDermott, those guys, neither one of them, or McDermott didn't even get an interview. Shurmur was the interim, and he loses out here. Do you think that one of those guys might have been a better decision than Doug Pederson?
I don't know about better decision. Sometimes you just need something fresh. Sometimes you need something unknown. Sometimes you need something controversial, something that you're unsure about. You need that element. And there's so much pressure to be a Philadelphia Eagles, not just a player, but a head coach. I mean, it's tough. I mean, they want to win right now, and I think that's the wild card right here. You're bringing in a new coach who has all types of familiarity with what's going on, the infrastructure of the organization. Owner Jeffrey Leary, he's been around everyone, so he's a known guy here. But these fans want to win now. And I don't know if putting a new coach with no coaching experience at this position in Philly is a right situation. But again, if you're talking about infrastructure, knowing the situation, knowing the front office people, Doug Pederson's been around that system long enough in Philly, in Kansas City, in Cleveland, in Green Bay. So offensive-minded, he is not a bad fit.
You mentioned the pressure, and you were here for just 1 year, but that team with 12-4, the expectations were to win a Super Bowl. Obviously, they came up short. How is it different in Philly than Green Bay, which I guess the expectations in Green Bay when Favre was there was that you're going to win every year as well. But what's different about Philly and a place like Green Bay?
Well, during my tenure in Philly, we were a young team still. We had Donovan McNabb at the quarterback, Pinkston Thrash. Deuce Staley was still a up-and-coming force in the league. So we were providing excitement. And pretty much as long as we beat Washington and we beat Dallas and New York and we won a division, that was the first step to making Philly fans happy. But, even after I left, the T.O. years, just a disappointment. I mean, to get so close, even during my tenure in Philly, we got to a point in the NFC Championship, and Donovan McNabb had to come back from injury. A.J. Philly had been playing so well, leading us to a 5-1 record with McNabb out, and so on and so on. But none of that mattered because the Philly fans, they want a championship now. And I don't know if Doug Pederson is going to be comfortable in those shoes for the next 2 or 3 years as a Philly coach.
Interesting. Antonio Freeman's with us, ESPN Wisconsin now, and of course, A Freeman 86 on Twitter. That's interesting because some people thought maybe Tom Coughlin would have been an interesting hire, but he said he only wanted to coach for 2 or 3 more years. Would that have been worth it to take a shot with Coughlin if only he was here for 2 or 3 years?
It might have been worth it. I think owner Jeffrey Leary knows that to rebuild that infrastructure and to have it Coach Coughlin's way, it might take 2 years. It might take 3 years just to get that team to that point. So building the infrastructure in 2 or 3 years on a team that, A, has had quality personnel and has lost some of that due to Chip Kelly and his decision-making, I don't know if 2 or 3 years was enough for Coach Coughlin to finally get all the pieces turned and the wheels turning for this Philadelphia Eagles organization.
Well, Antonio, I know you're kind of looking at it from afar, but obviously you're very plugged into the game and the league still. Was the Kelly thing a surprise? Was it a failure? Did they make a knee-jerk reaction?
I think it was a failure. We're talking about 2 or 3 years for Coach Coughlin. Well, let's look at Coach Chip Kelly's tenure there. It only lasted 3 years, and now you're forced to start the clock all over again for a town, for a fan base who's ready for a Super Bowl championship now. Yes, Chip Kelly won 10 games his first 2 seasons. But they want more. They want championships. I didn't hear or smell NFC championship or anything like that during Coach Kelly's tenure there. And to make that type of personnel change, the way he came in and got rid of key players and got rid of star players and made those decisions himself, I think that set him up for a losing situation. And when that losing situation fell into place, winning 6 games a year ago, the Philly fan base, they got tired. And it's just time for a change. Now you have to rebuild because he got rid of just about all of their playmakers. And, it just wasn't a good situation for this Philadelphia Eagles football team.
Yeah, I think took a lot of risks. Took a big swing. I think, Antonio, people are okay when you take the risk, but step up and admit it, and I think that's the problem. Was he a bad coach, or his downfall was he wasn't much like Coach Reed will do. Hey, I need to do a better job. We need to do a better job of putting these guys. Maybe Antonio Freeman needs to do this, but he's not going to say Antonio Freeman needed to do that. Andy Reid would say, I need to do a better job. Chip seemed like he was unwilling to do that. And does that rub players the wrong way?
It rubs players, it rubs fans, it rubs everybody the wrong way. I mean, I wouldn't say he was a bad coach. It's just that the decisions he made and the changes that he decided to go with, he had no legitimate substitutions for. He had no legitimate answers and replacements for those guys. He let guys go that were players that they put in work and they created opportunities for this football team. When you take away your playmakers, you better darn sure well have other playmakers to plug in so that this system continues to work the way that you see it fit, because sometimes as a fan, sometimes as a spectator, we can't see your vision and what you want to get out of this. So the changes you make, you better have some very capable fill-ins if you're going to make such bold changes to an organization. And I think that was the downfall of his coaching time in Philly. He didn't have legitimate answers to those dynamic playmakers that he released.
Antonio Freeman's with us. I'm really interested, too, because they hire Pederson, and a lot of people think that Pederson's hired mainly because of Reed, and that Reed basically put the stamp of approval, and because that he would not rock the boat with the front office, mainly Howie Roseman. And a lot of people think Kelly's gone because he and Roseman couldn't get along. And you're a player. Does that bother you to feel that the front office can't get along with the coach?
If you're one of those players that's into everything and you read the paper and you want to know what the reporters say about you and all that, yeah, you'd be concerned. But as a player, your job is to go out there and play football. You're being analyzed every day and watched over every day to see whether you're improving, how you're improving, whether you're regressing and things of that nature. So I always felt as a player that my job is to A, do my job, B, do my job, and C, do my job the best I can and not worry about those other things.
Well, I know moving forward here, does this hire, you played for Doug, you obviously played for Andy, is the NFL, is a lot of who you know, is Doug Pederson the Eagles head coach because he knew Andy Reid?
Again, I revisited Doug's very impactful career, not only as a player but as an assistant coach, as a coordinator, and he does have a track record, a history of being in the NFL. But like anything else in life, let's not get confused. Everything, and I mean everything, is about who you know. So whether his hire is about that specifically, just all in all in the world, everything is about who you know. So I wouldn't be surprised that the tight connection between he and Andy, the confidence that Andy has in him and has had in him over the years now, because Andy was in Green Bay when Favre starred and Doug Pederson was the backup quarterback. So this goes back. If you're talking about putting a stamp of approval on something, this goes back to 1996. So you're talking about being in this West Coast offense for that long, understanding what's going on, knowing the ins and outs, and knowing the true infrastructure of the West Coast offense and studying it for 20 years. That's the package that Doug Pederson brings to this Philadelphia football head coaching job.
Well, we'll see how long it will take him to be the next head coach. They have a game this weekend. Green Bay has a game this weekend. They're going to be out in Arizona. And some people thought they would stumble in Washington last week. Did they show you something last week in Washington that makes you feel like they can go to Arizona after they got whipped there a couple of weeks ago?
I really think Arizona is a really, really good football team. I've said it a lot this year. Arizona is one of the top teams in the NFC. And Green Bay, yes, they should have gone to Washington and beat that football team. Washington appeared in the playoffs. They won a very soft NFC East this year. The Packers struggled, after the bye week, only going 4-6. So they struggled during the second half of the season. But when you have a dynamic quarterback, a superstar caliber quarterback, he gives you extra chances to win. And I think this football team was able to ride the shoulders of Aaron Rodgers and win this football game. And it was a tough road victory, but that was a game I thought they should have won. They'll have a much tougher time in Arizona this week without Devontae Adams, without Andrew Quarles, who they've been out without a lot this year. So defensively, the defense will be the main staple on whether this Packers football team can win this game or not. The offense has continued to struggle. We don't know which offense we'll get this week. So, defense has to step up, and the Packers running game, that's going to be the biggest element to the success of the Packers for this football game, is whether or not they can run the football.
I feel like I still see James Starks running against the Eagles a couple of years ago. That guy just seems to have big games in the playoffs. We'll see if he can do it again. Antonio Freeman's with us. We talk about the teams. Forget about the teams for a minute. Russell Wilson or Cam Newton? Which way you going there?
Wow, Cam. This year, Cam.
Yeah. I would have said Wilson the last couple of years too, but Newton just playing at such a high level this year. That's a tough one. I agree with you there. The quarterback matchups are great in these playoffs.
Cam has the offensive line. If you have a healthy offensive line, which Russell Wilson had the benefit of having the past few years before they made the change at center, and things got a little out of whack just for a second there, but it's all about the offensive line. If you can have a solid engine in your car, then you'll have less problems out of the transmission. You'll have less problems out of the other things. So, though each great quarterback has had a great offensive line, because that's the true key to an effective quarterback, because you can't just drop back and pass the ball 75 times a game and say, oh, he's a great quarterback. You have to be able to run the football and protect that elite quarterback. And that Carolina Panthers offensive line is one heck of a unit right now.
Always a professional, and, of course, the Green Bay Packers Super Bowl champion. 1 year in Philadelphia with Andy Reid and the Eagles. Antonio Freeman, he's at A Freeman 86, ESPN, Wisconsin. Good to catch up with him. It was really cool to hear your insight on a lot of this stuff, Antonio. Good to catch up.
Hey, thank you. And maybe if Doug Pederson gets a whiff of this interview, he might call me up for a receiving coaching job. So.
I went to ask you.
Doug.
I went to ask you if you had any interest in coaching at all. It sounds like that's something you'd like to do.
Well, I work out with guys. I work out with several receivers and get them prepared for the combines and get them ready for their pro days and things of that nature. I've had the privilege of working with Percy Harvin, Riley Cooper, Tavon Austin, Dante Moncrief, just to name a few of the guys. So I've had some coaching one-on-one opportunities with guys and just helping them change and elevate their game from the college game to what the pros want. So I've had some success in doing that. But again, that whole infrastructure of coaching, that's got to be tough,
Yeah, it's tough.
You got to try something. You got to try mayonnaise before you realize, hey, I like tartar sauce better, right?
Well, hopefully Doug gets a whiff of this, and maybe, yes, we could see you back in Philadelphia. Antonio, great stuff, pal. Take care.
Hey, thank you.